So good morning, everybody. I'm Miroslav Krstic. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. And I was really pleased to be thought of by Gert and Lisette as a person who could say a few words to help open your open house. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I do have a soft spot for INC. I think it's one of the absolutely most significant ORUs that we have on campus. It's a true UCSD treasure, and I want to welcome all of you here from INC, from other units and divisions on campus, people from development like Anne, and I'm looking to see Jennifer, but I would spell Jennifer easily, huh? Another? You're representing Jennifer. Okay, good to have you here. So INC is truly special among the ORUs, and it's a model ORU. I wish we had many like this. Why is it a model ORU? Well, first of all, it has had multiple centers within this institute. We've had TDLC, we continue to have the Schwartz Center, and so on. It has faculty, research scientists, project scientists, and graduate students. So researchers at all levels. It produces both scholarship and it has had entrepreneurial outcomes, impressive ones. The range of activities is just breathtaking from
glaucoma research with TP John.
Absolutely.
And addiction recovery with Mateo Scola.
Yeah, so
lab with Scott McKay. I could go on.
Yeah, so we were just talking about addiction. So you have things from addictions and disorders all the way to the study of the neural underpinnings of creative endeavors like music, which itself is maybe the best addiction to have. You do things from the science of learning all the way to the technological things like brain-computer interfaces. People here have worked on neural networks of the artificial kind, all the way to those of the real kind, and so on. It goes on forever. So I do get to see some of your research as a part of the merit reviews for research and project scientists, and as a part of the ORU 5-year reviews. And just I'm very often filled with awe, and sometimes with a little bit of envy at what you do. When I talk with philosophers, I hear frequently that at this day and age, if they don't start casting some of what they do within the framework of neural science, and if they don't learn some of it, including even the quantitative, let alone the qualitative, they will no longer be seen as relevant or even scholarly. The impact of what you do has been tremendous in other fields as well, from computer science to computer engineering. The neuromorphic computing is making a major difference in robotics, imaging, and even in physics. The problems that you study are very complex, but I don't know any colleague who doesn't think that his or her scholarly subject is very complex, and maybe, or frequently, the most significant of all scholarly subjects. It's just that most people are too smart not to voice that feeling. But when it comes to complexity, you will hear people in certain areas say that they work on the most complex system designed by man. You will hear it from people working in fusion. You will hear it from people working in electric grids. You will hear it from people working in the studies of governance in our democracy. Now, while complex, all of these problems can be understood by our brains. It's only the brain that may be a device that is that complex whose understanding can't be reached by itself. So it is so complex that I'm glad that it's you working on these problems and not me. With that, I again want to tell you how pleased I am to be here. I want to thank you for making UCSD known as the powerhouse in your field, for bringing respect to UCSD. I want to thank INC also for serving as a network that connects many administrative nodes in research across this campus. And I hope that this open house helps you make this house a bigger house. Thank you.
Thank you, Miroslav. It was great. And so let me extend a warm welcome on behalf of the leadership of NSC here to everyone. So thanks for coming. This is supposed to be a open house, and you'll see the brain in action. So please stick around. We'll have some, so after all the talks here, we'll have some things to read, because we'll have a great show of some of the leading technologies that we're developing here. Let me say a few more words. So INC is actually the oldest existing organized research unit on campus. It started as the Institute of Cognitive Science in the early, in the 1960s. Then it transitions after the department of, the institute became a department. So then the Institute of Neurocomputation started. This was about 25 years ago. And so we have been around for a while. And there are a few important aspects of neurocomputation that we aim to cover here. It's computational neuroscience, which has become a very important field. Temporal dynamics of learning has been really invented here, if you want. It started here at UC San Diego in INC. And now more and more there is big data that is playing an important role in everything, right? And so INC has been central on campus, connecting with other initiatives, and I just name a few here, right? So there is, now the latest is the Data Sciences Institute here, right? There's also CalT2, there is the Supercomputer Center here, and then there's also, on the medical side, there is the Engineering Medicine, the Institute of Engineering Medicine. So the mission of INC in general, right, is to bring together the diverse research community in the basic sciences, medical engineering disciplines at INC in advancing. It's important because a new science of computational learning based on, because in a very broad sense, the multi-scale, parallel, and highly adaptive architectures found in biological neural systems. And to do so, we connect with the outside. This is not just something on campus here, but we connect both locally here, local industry, as well as also globally, because the science of neurocomputation and learning communities. And just to name a few here, right, you see here, for instance, locally there's Qualcomm, there is then also local small companies like Cauwenberghs, Intian, Neurovigil, and then you also have, because on a global scale, there's, because from Apple now is also in a way, because has benefited from some of the INC work that happened here. Emotion was a spin-off from INC, and then was acquired by Apple just a few years ago. So, right, so we're committed to continuing this dialogue and then this interaction with the community worldwide. Some of the research we have done really, because, and Miroslav hinted at some of the different aspects of our work, but it really embraces then both the neuroscience, the interactive neuroscience, including brain-computer interfaces, with then also computational modeling, right, where we then embed both the models of how neurocomputation is performed, and then also how we use those techniques for interfacing to the brain as a loop, being able to even solve hard problems such as remediation of Parkinson's disease. Right? So how do you connect globally? And there are a few very important initiatives that we did. So INC was instrumental in launching, this was a 10-year project, the Temporal Dynamics of Learning Center. This was initially with support from the National Science Foundation over 10 years, a total of more than $33 million. And this really spurred a lot of interest globally in a network, because across the nation, but also globally now, because around the globe. And some latest outcomes of that effort that continue are then to establish a global science of learning network. So Andrea Chief has been instrumental in making that, I guess, going, with some additional support from the Gates Foundation, Jacobs Foundation, and also the National Public Education Support Fund. Now, INC is also very well known for the Schwartz Center for Computational Neuroscience, which is a major center that has had major impact in the field of how you analyze brain activity, especially EEG, electroencephalogram recording, also MRI. And so EEG lab, BCI lab are major tools available to the community that have spun from this effort here. We're very active in the field, I guess, in meetings, publications, etc. Just one aspect I want to cover, right, is this recent science of global science of learning, I guess, network that is now being spun off, and so we'll continue in that direction. So this will be a dimension of INC that is bigger than INC itself. This will be basically going across the nation, across the world, and so hopefully this will be it's a big thing that we're pushing forward here. If you want to know more, you can check out our web pages, but more importantly now, we just go around and we'll get a few presentations now, and then we'll have real live interactive demos. So with that, let me introduce now John Iverson, who will start with the next presentation.
Thank you, Gert, and thank you, Miroslav. So I'm one of the first scientific presentation today, and I'll be talking about the power of music. It's an interesting place to start, but I think you'll agree that music plays a role in nearly all of our lives. So this talk, I'll talk about how we can use music as a tool to understand the brain. So if you think about, for a second, what's going on in your brain as you make or listen to music, a simple answer is a whole lot. As you can imagine, music touches on emotion, memory, processing of sound, of course, motor activity as well. So we can use music as a tool to understand the brain. But it goes beyond that. It also helps us understand ourselves as humans. How did we become musical? Where did our music and language come from? One way to study that is to look at comparative studies, looking at other animals. And of course, music has power in terms of health and learning as well. And these are topics of interest. My personal focus is on rhythm. I'm actually a drummer, so it's not a big surprise there. But if you think about rhythm, dance, rhythm is really one way that humans can tie each other together, right? If you think about going to a concert, everyone's clapping on the beat, or a rave, or a dance, or dancing with a partner. It's a basic form of communication. And some have gone as far as to say the ability of humans to synchronize with each other is really perhaps one of the key social developments that enabled humans to form modern societies, larger societies. And what makes it additionally interesting is, surprisingly, moving in time to sound is pretty rare in the animal world. So despite the fact that dogs have been with us domesticated for tens of thousands of years, there's no recorded example of a dog dancing with a human, other than highly trained, staged examples on YouTube. Perhaps more surprisingly, our closest relatives are not on the street playing drums, right? And there's some reasons to think that why they might not ever be. Okay, it has to do with what is it about our brain that enables us to be rhythmic, and what might they be lacking. The third surprise was that we actually discovered about 10 years ago now a parrot that could dance. Okay, and we've continued studying this. So one thing that we have in common with parrots is vocal learning. So that may be one clue. If we look a little deeper, if you think about just the simple thing of clapping your hands along with the beat of music, it seems really simple. I know all of us are as good at that as each other, but we can all do it to some fashion. Turns out that simple action relies on both of the major motor systems in the brain. So it's actually neurally incredibly complex, and I think it gives us a window into really how sensory and motor systems interact. So that's one big focus of my research. And because of this, it can also give us some idea about how music can be used in motor rehabilitation as well as learning. One of the things that humans do which is unique as far as we know, is something called beat perception. You know, when you listen to music, there's a sense of beat you want to tap your foot with. Well, it turns out that that's really fundamentally shaped by the brain, we think. So that if you take a given sound, your brain can actually interpret it by, in a sense, moving along inside, okay, kind of a feeling of the pulse. And depending on how you line that up with the music, where the one is, you can create different types of rhythms from the same sound. A simpler way of asking this is, well, what makes an upbeat an upbeat? Okay, upbeat is just a sound like any other. Well, it's where it falls in time in relation to your internal sense of beat that makes it an upbeat. So there's something fundamental that we know just behaviorally. And like a visual analog is in the sense that we can interpret different visual scenes depending on how we shift our attention. So in thinking about this, we came up with some basic structural models. What would be required for humans to have these abilities? And just to focus on one, we're looking at interactions between the auditory and motor system. And while it's pretty self-evident that sound leads to movement, that we can dance and so forth, that there's an upward connection, we've hypothesized the importance of this downward connection from motor to auditory as being really critical for enabling beat perception. And then we also hypothesized a circuit in the brain that would actually be involved in this motor to auditory connection. So I'll tell you briefly about how we're going about trying to test that hypothesis. So how do we study the brain? There are many methods, but as Gert mentioned, what we do here at INC, and particularly SCCN, is to look at EEG, electroencephalography, which is basically using electrodes on the surface of the brain to measure very small voltage fluctuations that actually reflect the electrical activity inside the brain. Okay. So you can think of it a bit like how geologists measure seismographs on the surface of the Earth. But what really matters is not what's happening out here, it's what's happening in there. So a little over 20 years ago, Scott McCaig, T.P. Jung, Terry Sidnowski, and others at INC kind of discovered that if they applied this technique called ICA, independent component analysis, you can actually go from the surface of the brain to talk about what's happening inside the brain. And that one discovery has really led to this fantastic world of software that's been developed here based around the EEG lab. And so importantly, in the case of rhythm, it can actually let us talk about what's happening in different locations in the brain. So each of these little dots is a different location in the brain. And we can actually ask of each of those, well, does this part of the brain care about music? Does it care about sound? Does it care about the beat? Does it care about movement? And so we can actually look at the waveforms evoked by different stimuli in those different parts of the brain. And in so doing, we can create a map, essentially, where we look at parts of the brain that are sound-related, marked in red here, and parts that are beat-related. And so we did this using an experiment where we actually were able to disentangle the beat and the sound in time. So we made very syncopated rhythms where the beat and the sound were offset in time, and so we could use that to study where the beat is happening, because it's really this sort of thing happening inside. And this is in a case of pure listening, no movement. So it's quite interesting to see that, perhaps not surprisingly, we see auditory responses in the auditory cortex. But we see the strongest beat-related responses up in the motor planning cortex. So this is the part of the brain that plans movements, not necessarily executes them. So even sitting perfectly still while you're listening to music with a beat, that motor planning area is very active. And so again, we've hypothesized that this activity is used by the auditory system to really shape our perception and our expectations. So you could say rhythm perception is inherently embodied. So even regardless of whether we're moving or not, our motor system is highly engaged, and we would say necessary for understanding sound. So that opens up a whole lot of possibilities in terms of health and learning. So just one example in terms of health. This is not work we're doing right now, but it's something myself, Johanna Wagner, Scott, and Mateusz are very interested in pursuing, was the idea of using music as a way to rebuild rhythm in people who've essentially lost their rhythm. So this is an example of a video from a music therapist. And it's inevitable. I'm sorry, that's not playing. Oh, it's not playing here. Okay, my gosh. Sorry about that.
But no music.
Here we go. So this woman in blue has Parkinson's disease. And you'll see she's got many of the characteristics, a fairly shuffling, small gait, frozen mask feature. She's not able to walk without being led along by the aid. When the music comes on, you'll notice a transformation. So music therapists have been exploring that, but there's still lots of outstanding questions. But we think it is that auditory motor, that tight connection that makes that possible. It doesn't work for everyone. It often doesn't persist after the music turns off. So is there some way we can, build stronger therapies? Also very interested in rhythm and development. So how rhythm can be used to promote, optimal development. So we know that essentially, parent-child communication is highly rhythmic. There's an important temporal connection between them. And if you break that, the child becomes very distressed. So there's kind of a call-response, action-reaction. And in fact, it's been shown that kids who drum together with adults have so-called pro-social impact. They're actually more helpful, more connected, more trusting. And if you look at adults that play music together in sync, they like each other more. If they're out of sync, I'm not so sure about that guy. So there's a very strong social connection. And it turns out that also your rhythmic ability is quite predictive of a variety of language abilities. So there's a strong music-language link. And similarly, in a bunch of disorders of learning, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, rhythm is impaired. So this is an area of active interest in the field. The way we've been pursuing it is through a series of studies, symphony, and now the early study, which we're kind of taking the idea of the growth curves, of height and weight. And this is with colleagues in the Center for Human Development, led by Terry Jernigan. And what they've been doing for the past decade or so is really trying to define growth curves of the brain. So how does the brain of a child grow over time? And how do different areas of the brain grow over time? And what we're looking at is, well, how does music change those growth curves? Does music accelerate the growth in certain areas of the brain? And I'm happy to say we were recently actually awarded a National Endowments for the Arts Research Lab grant, one of 6 for this year. So it's creating a center for the study of music in the brain. That's part of INC and CHD. So one kind of finding that we've had so far is looking to see how actually the motor area of the brain, the size of the motor area, determines individual differences in rhythm perception ability. So again, making this brain perception link. So ultimately, the idea is, can we use the brain to understand individual differences in development? And finally, TP will talk a lot more about this, but there are a number of opportunities in emerging methods. We're looking towards a future where EEG could be ubiquitous, easy to use, and we have a grant to look at the possibility of using EEG in the classroom. So that's just an overview of some of the things that I'm working on, and we'll have more time to talk during the demos. We'll have a demo of a completely different topic, but looking at navigation. So we do motion capture. We want to connect how the brain works with how the body works. So thank you very much.